I'm waiting for my button. There we are. Good afternoon, Mr. and Mrs. Vermonter and all the canoes on the Connecticut. This is Senate Institutions for the Vermont State Senate. We are here on February 18th, 2021. We'll be having some conversation of a historical nature and some legal matters we're going to talk about. But first, by way of introductions, I'm Joe Benning, the chair of the committee. We have, in the order that I see them on my screen, Senator Ingalls from Essex Orleans, Senator Mazza from Grand Isle, Senator McCormick from Windsor, and Senator Parent from Franklin County. We'd like to welcome back to the round table former Senator, although do you keep it forever, that moniker of Senator Carolyn Brannigan?
I think so, actually, yeah. But okay. Whatever, people know me.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
You do keep the title Senator forever. However, during my time away, I realized that nobody knew that but me. So if you use it, they think you're insane.
Well, I know in my case, my wife always just refers to me as, hey, you. That's about all I I'm noticing that I once again have lost my little Senate title for some reason today. That keeps happening. We are here first to talk about an historic roadside marker that may be planned for Franklin County, Senator Parent. Here's another ribbon cutting opportunity for you.
We had a beautiful one in Bakersfield last year.
Yes. Well, Senator Brannigan is going to be giving us the lead remarks, as I understand it, and then Laura Treichman will come in and pick it up from there. So, Carolyn, welcome back. And by the way, we are live on YouTube now, so I have to give this explanation. There's probably thousands of people out there that are eagerly watching this program right now that we don't know anything about. So in the event there's at least one, we try to give a basic introduction for every witness who comes in to join us, and a little bit maybe about your biographical history so that people will know who you are.
Okay, thank you, Senator Benning, and hello, everybody. Laura, hello. I didn't say hi to you in the beginning. It's nice to see you. And everyone else, thank you for inviting me here. My name is Carolyn Brannigan. I live in the town of Georgia up in Franklin County, and I'm a former state legislator. I served 7 terms in the House of Representatives and 1 term in the Vermont State Senate when I had to leave due to illness, but the short version of the illness story is I got better. And so now I'm back on my feet and raring to go. One good thing about having to quarantine here is that you get a lot of time to read. And I've been reading up a lot on Georgia history, and I learned about a fascinating man who more than one town in the state want to claim. But I want to give you the background information that I have, and then make a request. So thanks, Senator Benning and everyone for inviting me to speak this afternoon. My request of your committee is to have an historic marker placed somewhere in Franklin County in memory of the man that we know now as Jeffrey Brace. So briefly, Jeffrey Brace was only 16 years old when taken by slave traders from his home in Africa to Barbados and sold to a ship captain. Later, he was taken to the American colonies where he was sold several more times. He earned his freedom by serving 5 years as a soldier in the American Revolutionary War, after which he settled in Vermont because slavery was not allowed here, theoretically, and he had heard flattering descriptions of the land. Those are his words, flattering descriptions. So he first lived in the Poultney area in the southern part of the state. He worked in Manchester and Dorset, and eventually he moved to northern Vermont. He lived briefly in Sheldon and finally settled permanently in the town of Georgia, my hometown, and the town that I represented there at the State House for 18 years. He lived in Georgia for the rest of his life, raised his family there, joined a church, and then passed away in 1827 in Georgia. In about 1810, he told his life story to the St. Albans-based biographer, lawyer, and abolitionist Benjamin Prentice. The story was published, The Blind African Slave, or the Memoirs of Boireru Binch. The story was printed in book form in St. Albans, but the publisher went out of business the week after the book was printed. Remember, this is 1810. Only a few copies of the original book are left. The University of Vermont Special Collections has one copy. A few years ago, Carrie J. Winter, a professor at the University of Buffalo, arranged to have the biography reprinted. And for this new edition, she added historical notes and maps to make the narrative easier to understand. Senator Benning, much of my information that I want to share with you this afternoon comes from that book, that second edition of The Blind African Slave. And Joe, the copy that I got for you just came today. I'm so pleased. I'm going to pop it in the mail and send it to you. I also ordered myself one. I read the original. Being a former UVM trustee, I have easy access to the special collections. So I went down there and I read through the original version. There are a couple of folks in St. Albans that have a copy of the original also, but there aren't very many of them around. This new version is much better, though, I have to say. She includes maps and chronologies, pictures, even one of Jeffrey Brace's grave. Corey, while I talk about that grave, the bottom of that grave just says from Cemetery St. Albans. Do you know which cemetery in St. Albans they call the St. Albans Cemetery? I wonder if it's Greenwood.
Yeah, I think it'd be the one by Town School, I think is the oldest one.
Oh,
right
yeah.
there.
Okay.
We've got that one. That's a historic one. The Bay one's newer.
Okay.
But there's one on Mill River, but that's probably in Georgia. There's an old small
Yes.
grave on Mill River Road.
Yes, I know that cemetery. It is in Georgia, the Everett's Cemetery, where I first thought that he must be buried. Okay, I don't want to get any more distracted, but it's from this biography that we get the rich and rare information of Jeffrey Brace's early life in Africa. Details of life on a slave ship, his life as a slave, the story of his fight during the Revolutionary War, and the activities and circumstances that brought him to Vermont. I know of no other book like this one that tells the story of a person starting with his life before captivity through living as a free man. And because it is transcribed from Jeffrey Brace's own words, the book is primary source information. He had a really amazing life. He was born with the name Boireru Binch in 1742, the son of a prominent family in the kingdom of Bawu on the river Naboa, or the Niger River, in Central Africa. It was a province of the Empire of Morocco. His father served as governor of the county and also as captain of the King's Life Guards in the court of the local king. His grandfather had been an honored war hero. Jeffrey Brace was old enough when captured to remember the beauty of his homeland and what made it prosperous. Jeffrey was captured while swimming in the river with other boys on a feast day. They were well out of sight of their families. He tells details about the passage to the New World on the slave ship and was bothered throughout his life by the memory of the cruelty and injustices received by those who traveled with him and would become slaves. He tells several stories about this trip. There was one that stood out to me. It concerned a teenage girl who was the daughter of the king. Her parents thought they were sending her to the New World for a formal education to make her better prepared to come back and become queen of her country. It was not long when they were on the ship before the sailors on the ship stole all her gold jewelry, fine clothes, and sent her below deck to wait to be sold into slavery. The trip across the Atlantic was really terrible. When he arrived in Barbados, he was purchased by an English ship captain. Jeffrey Brace was forced to fight as an enslaved sailor for 2 years during the 7 Years' War. With the ship, he then traveled to Havana, Cuba, Dublin, Ireland, Savannah, Georgia, New York City, Halifax, Nova Scotia, and lastly to New Haven, Connecticut, where he first saw snow. I'm skipping a lot here, but in Connecticut, he was sold several times and finally ended up in the kind home of an elderly lady, Mary Stiles. In her home, he learned to read and improved his English. And when her 3 sons all left to fight in the in the Revolutionary War, Jeffrey went with them. Brace enlisted in the Continental Army in hopes of earning his freedom. After 5 years of military service, he was honorably discharged with merit and was freed from slavery. His service in the Revolution itself is worthy of our recognition. He served under General George Washington and more than once proved his bravery and loyalty. And so he earned his freedom by fighting in the American Revolution. There's one great story in this book, Joe. I know you'll read the book when it comes in the mail, but gee, there's one story when he's serving as a soldier in the Continental Army, and he is sent out on patrol to look for British soldiers who might be encamped around them or near them. And he meets this guy coming toward him on a horse, and the man is dressed up like a peasant or a local farmer. And the guy starts talking to him and luring him to come closer, and then starts shooting at him. Jeffrey is on foot, but he has a rifle. And the other guy starts shooting at him. So Jeffrey starts shooting back, and they exchange fire a few times. Jeffrey has no idea who this guy is, but the guy falls off his horse, and the horse runs toward Jeffrey. Jeffrey is not a good horseman, but the horse is top notch. So he pulls himself up onto the horse, and they start to gallop back toward where they're all encamped. And he realizes that behind him are a whole bunch of British soldiers, all in red coats, chasing. This guy was a lure to try and get Americans up toward them so they could kill them off one by one. Anyway, Jeffrey is taking off like crazy, heading back to camp. His jacket is flying, and his fellow soldiers are all there at camp, and they realize what's happening. They can see the redcoats behind Jeffrey Brace, and so they start shooting. They shoot out around Jeffrey and around the horse, but they hit Jeffrey's coat a couple times. He has holes in his coat, and one went through his cap, but he did not get hurt or hit. So he gets back home, falls off the horse. His captain takes the horse. Turns out this is a really beautiful horse. The guy that called him was an English grenadier. They specialized in having really fancy horses. Anyway, that story goes on for a few pages in the book. I think you're going to love it. So the Revolutionary War is over. Jeffrey Brace gets his freedom. He moves to Vermont in 1784, settled in Poultney. While there, he worked as a free man for several people, some of whom paid him and some did not. He met and married a dark-skinned woman, a former slave. Her name was Susanna. They lived in a log cabin on land in Poultney, which Jeffrey paid for, but never received legal title. His biggest problem in Poultney was that the neighbor continued to harass the Brace family. Susanna was a widow with 2 children that she had before she married Jeffrey. And these 2 children from the former marriage were forced by neighbors into indentured servitude simply because of the color of their skin. Susanna and Jeffrey had other children of their own by this time who were very young, and the parents were afraid that they too would be taken away and forced into servitude. So the family moved as far away as they could get to Franklin County in the far northwest corner of the state, where they lived first briefly in Sheldon, and then they moved to Georgia. And Jeffrey Brace lived the rest of his life in Georgia. I'm delighted at the words he uses about living in the town of Georgia, and I quote from his words that are here in the book. I removed in the spring of 1804 to Georgia, a pleasant situated town on the banks of Lake Champlain, where I purchased with my son-in-law 60 acres of land from Squire Everts, Evarts, and where I contemplated spending my days. Here I settled down in the peaceful sunshine of anticipated delight. Industry caused prosperity to hover around my cot. So apparently he was treated fairly by the people in Georgia. They supported his efforts to receive a military pension for his services in the Revolution, an argument that Brace fought out in Franklin County Court. The book continues, and toward the end of the book, we learn of the death of Jeffrey's wife and of his own religious conversion. He was baptized in the Lamoille River. Corey, that's the river that runs along 104A, of course. And later he joined the Baptist Church in Georgia, where in fact my family have been members for more than 60 years. He raised his family and grandchildren in Georgia, and some of his descendants still live in Franklin County. When he died, April 20th, 1827, Jeffrey Brace was a well-respected abolitionist. I know from doing other studies that in 1835, in the town of, in the state of Vermont, there were 30 anti-slavery societies. By this time, 1830, we're moving up toward the Civil War. In 1835, 3 of those anti-slavery societies were located in the town of Georgia. So I think during the time that Jeffrey lived in Georgia, which would be in the early 1800s through 1827, I think that already there must have been a strong feeling that slavery was wrong, and an urging of fairness for treatment of people of different color. Remember also that this is Franklin County. There were a lot of Abnaki people here at that time, and still are here in Franklin County. So many people had intermarried with those people of color, the Abnaki, and Jeffrey Brace arrives, his skin is black. That's not that much different from being an Abnaki. So I think he fit right in. People treated him fairly. So Jeffrey Brace, born in 1742, Laura, you asked for these figures. He was captured in 1758, discharged from the Continental Army in 1782, moved to Pulteney, 1784, moved to Sheldon, 1802, moved to Georgia, 1804, died 1827. So that's 18 years in Bennington and Rutland County that he lived, and 25 years in Franklin County. Senators, in 2008, an historic marker was placed in the town of Pulteney at the request of their local historical society. The town of Georgia does not want to get in a squabble with the town of Pulteney over who has the right to have possession of the historic marker. We believe the Pulteney marker should remain where it is. However, we want a second marker to acknowledge the location of where Jeffrey Brace lived in the longest time, Franklin County, Vermont, and where his court fight occurred and where his descendants still live. By court fight, I'm referring to an argument that he had that lasted more than 3 years in Franklin County Court to get his pension. That was a battle, but he finally won, and he started to receive payments. I think it was 1824, $8 a year. But first he got a payment of amount that was due to him. It was over $300. I think that at that time it must have seemed like a fortune. They weren't wealthy people. They worked hard for everything they had. So I'm glad that he got payment in arrears. And then from then until when he died, he got the $8. So that's how he was able to survive. People like this helped make Vermont. Jeffrey Brace and his wife Susanna were world travelers when they arrived in Vermont. They'd been to Europe. They'd had to go there as slaves, but they'd been to England and Ireland, France, Havana, Cuba, all over the place. Jeffrey spoke 3 languages. He worked as a slave, so he was humble, but he was knowledgeable about the world and about what it took to be successful. So I think this is a person we should remember. I told Laura in one of our phone discussions that if if it's necessary to somehow reimburse the state for the cost of this historic marker, I'm sure I can get people to donate enough money to do that. But we want an official state recognition of the importance this man has had and his descendants continue to have here in our county, in Franklin County. So, Joe, Senator Benning, I'm going to remain here. I want to hear what Laura has to say, and I am happy to answer any questions that come forth.
Senator Parent.
Carolyn, where was his homestead in Georgia? Do you know where that was?
Yeah, that was on the Mill River Road, not far from the Everett Cemetery. He bought 60 acres in there. I actually think it was where Tony Heinlein lives, but I've got to go back. I've got to, trace the land. I didn't want to go down there. The snow is so deep. It's hard to walk around, but I think that's where it is, where the Mill River, there's a parking area in there, and Tony Heinlein built a house out in there.
Okay.
He had 60 acres.
Do you know if the grave is marked?
Yes, in the book, I was happy to see there is a picture of his grave and also the picture of his grandson who fought in the Civil War as part of the Massachusetts Black Regiment. They're both buried side by side, and it says in St. Albans Cemetery. I thought they were buried in the Everett Cemetery, which is on Mill River Road in Georgia, but I don't know. I'll find out.
Greenwood would make sense, Carolyn. I just Googled it, and that was the St. Albans Cemetery Association, 1803.
Oh, perfect.
So
Okay.
it's probably, knowing where his death is, it's been renamed Greenwood, but its original name was probably the St. Albans Cemetery.
Okay, good. That'll be easier. I love that Greenwood Cemetery. It's so beautiful. I'll go traipse around there when the snow goes away, Joe, and I'll let you know when I find it. But the picture
I'd
is
like
in the
to.
book.
I'd
Yeah.
like to know, and I'm very much interested in reading the book. And if you're sending it to me, I'll share it with the rest of the committee when I'm done.
Okay, terrific. If you need more copies, let me know. I'll get them.
Couple of more questions. First off, I'm glad Pat Gable's not on here, although Bill McSalis is on here. We just heard a great story about a former slave who gained his freedom in the Revolutionary War and then entered the court system to get his pension. It took him 3 years. Don't let Pat Gable know about that, because she'll think everything going on right now is just fine.
Yeah.
I want to,
Hi, Pat.
it brought to mind, though, that I spent quite a bit of time in St. Albans going from cemetery to cemetery, trying to find the gravesite of Captain Thomas Kennedy. And for those of you that don't know, if you're ever in the Cedar Creek room, the huge Cedar Creek battlefield painting directly in the middle features a wounded man being carried off the field. And that's Captain Thomas Kennedy. He has red hair and a red beard. He was wounded early in the morning of the battle. He was placed in a place called the Heater House on the battlefield, and the Confederates overran the position. Subsequently, they mistreated him while he was in there, and then the Union came and overran it again, and they rescued him, and he was a survivor of the war, went up to St. Albans. Actually, that's where he was from, but he was originally from Fairfax, actually, and was a captain. But the upshot is he spent the rest of his life with what we would now recognize as PTSD. Although he was elected sheriff, he had a very bad drinking problem, ended up falling on the railroad tracks, lost a hand under a railroad car, and was buried in St. Albans. I think that cemetery is called St. Mary's. I could be wrong. I don't know. I can't remember what the road is, but I did find his grave site. And now that I'm thinking about it, Laura, I don't think there's a roadside historical marker there for the guy who's the main character in that painting. That
No,
ought to be
it's-
something down the road.
Joe, it's funny you mentioned that. I represent St. Albans City in the House for a couple terms, and it was my first re-election. I went door to door a lot, and I knocked on this door on Brown Avenue, which is just by our hospital, and a nice elderly lady, probably in her late 80s or maybe early 90s, invited me in. She goes, "Do you recognize the painting on the wall?" And I go, "Yeah, it's the Battle of Cedar Creek." It was Thomas Kennedy's granddaughter, Pat, actual granddaughter, and so obviously her being 90 and just still thinking that she had memories, or the family had memories, and so she talked about that, and had come down to the State House throughout her life. They had done a ceremony with her their grandfather. So just neat to be able, think Civil War and still talk to someone's granddaughter, not great
Yeah.
great
Sure,
or
yeah.
great granddaughter, but actual granddaughter.
Corey, do you remember Dick Horrigan?
Yep.
Who was a representative from Fairfield for a while. Somehow he's related to Thomas Kennedy.
Yep.
I don't know how.
The Vermont Bar Association has bar counsel who prosecutes lawyers who've been charged with ethical offenses or answers ethical questions for lawyers. His name is Michael Kennedy. He's actually a descendant as well. And
Oh,
when the roadside marker that I first became involved with when I was on institutions 12 years ago is still the only out-of-state roadside marker that Vermont has placed at the battlefield of Cedar Creek. And on the day that we actually cut the ribbon for that, a lot of Kennedy's descendants appeared on the battlefield. I had known ahead of time that he was shot in the rear end during the early morning of the battle. And the descendants all swore that he was hit by friendly fire because he never would have had his back to the enemy. That's just a
Wow.
side note.
yeah. Wow, that's great.
Laura, what would you like to add to the conversation? I know we have money out there for this, and Carolyn's also volunteering to get you more money. So,
Well, I'll always take more money. So, but these markers cost $2,000 and I've added this one to the queue. There is already a precedent for having multiple markers. Justin Morgan's got 3 or 4 at this point around the state. Ethan Allen's got a couple. Chester Arthur has 2. So it's not unprecedented to have multiple markers continue to tell the story. I really appreciate the fact that you know where his property may have been so that we can put the marker closer to there. I'll work with Carolyn to get the right language and figure this out, and we can get rolling on it.
Oh, very good. Very
And,
good.
and also right now we're working on updating the African American Heritage Trail, which includes the marker in Pulteney, but I'm doing final edits so that I will add more of a Georgia aspect to it.
Okay, great.
okay.
Thank
And
you.
I looked up while you were all talking in Ancestry. He is buried in Greenwood Cemetery.
Greenwood. Okay, good. That's helpful. All right, terrific. So
If
just
his
like Corey
house-
said,
If his house is no longer in existence, would it be wiser to have the marker at the gravesite? Just something to think about.
We have done that in some occasions.
Okay, Senator McCormick, you have your hand up.
Yeah. First of all, Carolyn, thank you. I think this is good work.
yeah. Oh,
I'm
thanks.
excited to support you on it.
Thank you.
Do we have any markers in the state for Thaddeus Stevens?
Yes.
Yes,
Yes, we do.
Danville,
In Danville, okay.
like within sight of Jane Kitchell's house. I don't know if she had anything to do with it.
Actually, now that you mention it, she mentioned that once. Yeah. He should have a better portrait in the State House. than he did.
Yes, I agree. And speaking of which, Carolyn, did you say that there was a picture or drawing of him in the book? Mr. Brace?
No, there is not.
No.
There are just fictional pictures. What someone imagines he looked like. The only real picture is of his grave, the stone grave itself. There's no picture of him.
Well,
I've
it's a
been
great,
working with the
Unfortunately.
governor's office to try and find one, but I've never seen one.
it's a great story, and David Sheets is currently working on trying to come up with stories to tell. And this might be a very good addition to that conversation. So Carolyn, I'll just float that out there. You may want to talk to David to see if he's interested in following up somehow.
Okay, I'll be happy to.
Any other questions for Carolyn or Laura? Guys, thank you very much. Very fascinating story. I'll be looking forward to getting the book, and let me know if I owe you anything.
Okay, it's a gift, definitely.
I appreciate
right.
that.
Thanks, folks. Thanks
All
for
right.
having us on.
Thank you.
Thank
Have a
you.
good day. Bye.
Committee, we're going to shift gears for a couple of minutes to talk about the MOU that we were talking about a week or so ago. And I do understand there has been some progress and conversation. Pat Gable, I see, is joining us. She had asked to be part of the conversation. Pat, I don't know what time you actually signed on to this Zoom conference, but if you were listening to the tail end of that story, you would have heard the story of a black man who had been in the Revolutionary War and had to go 3 years to try to get his pension in the Vermont court system. I didn't want you to come away thinking that that's normal for the course for us in the court system right now.
I'm sorry I missed that story.
It was a great story. It really was. I don't want to belabor this or spend a whole lot of time this afternoon if it's not necessary, but Pat, this is your first time here. I didn't know whether you wanted to weigh into the conversation. I do understand that Commissioner Fitch and Sergeant at Arms Miller have both been communicating with each other, and that the court system is the third leg on that stool, if you will, for completing this MOU. And I don't know whether you've had conversation with the two of them or not, but I was going to at least give you the opportunity to say what you know and what you'd like to see happen.
So I know what the last MOU says, and and I also I'm also very aware how important it is that the Sergeant at Arms and the Commissioner and I have a good collaborative understanding of how to work together on Capitol complex security. So I'm not aware of any particular issues that have come up, other than understanding that it may be time to renew the MOU. And there are certain environmental issues. I don't mean environmental issues, but certain circumstances that have arisen lately where we want to pay close attention. So I think the one point I would make before stepping back and letting others more knowledgeable about the recent discussions go forward is that I think the people who report to us in security have a pretty good working relationship, and I think are providing good support to us. I know I would have appreciated maybe having 1 or 2 leadership updates a few weeks ago in terms of what circumstances were. And so that would be the one issue, is remembering that it would be important. For example, I have a statutory responsibility for the security of all the courts in the state. And so I just want to make sure that I have enough information and enough updates so that I can exercise that responsibility. But I have always appreciated the collaboration with the Sergeant of Arms and the Commissioner, and look forward to what issues may come up that may require changes in the MOU.
Pat, I didn't ask you to identify yourself when you began, so perhaps we ought to do that just to make it formal.
Okay, so I'm Patricia Gable, and I'm the Vermont State Court Administrator. And I say hello to all the members of the committee.
Thank you. Jennifer Fitch, Janet Miller, I don't know which one of you would like to go next.
I'm happy to have Janet go next.
She was probably going to say the same thing about you.
Yeah, either way is fine. So good afternoon. So Janet Miller, Sergeant at Arms here at the Vermont State House. So Jennifer and I did have a conversation the other day. And I think Jennifer had sent out an email to Pat and I as well. But I think the place that we landed, and Jennifer, just chip in anytime that you want, but Jennifer was going to take a stab at putting her changes into the existing MOU and then kind of pass it, maybe check it out with people she needs to check it out with, and then pass it along, and then we could add something. Or if we had something just to put it in, we just have to have a starting place of somebody to look at this MOU. So I'm fine. And Pat, I won't speak for you, Pat, but that if Jennifer, you just want to start that process, I'm good with that. And the other thing I would like to add is that when Jennifer and I had spoken, we thought one of the little bit of a stumbling block was going to be, when does the event plan turn into from a regular event over to a law enforcement? Or like, how can that be put into the MOU? Jennifer, am I correct in what we discussed?
Right, that is correct. So Senator Benning, my name is Jennifer Fitch. I am the BGS Commissioner for the record. Thank you for inviting me here today. just to give everybody everything that Pat and Janet has said is true, which is I actually called both of them last week and had a short conversation letting them both know that we were going to be revisiting the MOU. And I did follow up with an email on Friday, basically just reinforcing what I had said to both of them over the phone. And I also had an internal meeting this week with our legal counsel, as well as Bill McSalis, who is our director of the Office of State Safety and Security. And so, yes, all of that is true, and we are advancing as quickly as we can. After reflecting from our meeting last week and learning about mutual aid, right? I'm a new commissioner, so I'm learning these things as I go. And then rereading the 2016 MOU, what it clearly does is it clearly redefines our jurisdiction in terms of judicial branch has jurisdiction within their courthouses. The Sergeant at Arms, Janet, has jurisdiction within the State House, and then the BGS Commissioner has jurisdiction in state-owned buildings that's underneath the jurisdiction of BGS, as well as all grounds. And so it sort of reinforces the statutory authority of the three of us. And then it also discusses that the Sergeant at Arms has the authority to basically act on my steed, if you will, and that is to reinforce state facility rules. So I have a number of state facility rules that BGS has established. And through that MOU in 2016, it basically says that the Sergeant at Arms may reinforce those rules on the State House lawn. It also mentions mutual aid, which is a lot of the discussion last week, which is to say that if anything happens on the State House lawn that requires law enforcement to take action, whatever law enforcement is the one that's closest to the scene and can arrive and aid the BGS commissioner, shall do so as quickly as possible. And so for me, whether that's the Sergeant at Arms or the Montpelier Police Department, or let's say we had guards working for the judicial branch that could respond right away, then that would be great. And that's basically what the MOU says. The other thing that it notes is that we will, and this is where I think we really should spend a lot of our time, which is it talks about having, communication plans, and it talks about developing plans in general. And to me, kind of reflecting on the last 4 years in BGS, I think that's really the area where we have the most opportunity to improve, because I can't speak on behalf of the prior BGS commissioner, and he definitely led sort of the safety and security component. But being a casual observer in the background, I don't remember or recall many meetings between Patricia Gable as the court administrator or Janet Miller as the Sergeant at Arms. And one of the things that Bill and I talked about that we think is a real opportunity is to do just that, and that we should be meeting periodically, and that we should develop a communication plan, and that we should be talking about how we plan for events, whether they're planned or unplanned. And so there's definitely a lot of opportunity for us to work much more closely and collaboratively together. And I'm dedicated and committed to doing that. So, so in terms of reflecting on the MOU, from my perspective, it contains sort of all the aspects that I would be hoping to have within the MOU from my perspective. I just want to add a little bit more in there around communication, but and notification and concurrence. But other than that, which is just a very minor modification, which I plan to make this week, hopefully, and get it to folks next week, that would really be the only aspect that I would recommend changing at this time. In addition to, like I said, outside the MOU, really focus on that coordination and that communication and that planning and coordinating and working together. The thing that I am concerned about putting too many fine details into the MOU itself is that it constricts our ability, right? Whatever we put in there is sort of what I would call more rigid, versus us working together outside of the MOU is much more flexible, which means we can be a lot more dynamic, right? And we can modify our plans as needed to address whatever may be occurring at the time. So, so we are very actively working on it. We're dedicated, and I am committed to working with both Patricia and Janet, both on the MOU, but I think there's a lot of work and coordination to be done outside of the MOU as well.
Okay, I appreciate hearing all this, and I obviously believe all of you are perfectly capable and competent in moving forward. Let me just tell you that the reason we're having this discussion right now is the MOU itself was launched through statute, and part of the legislative responsibility is to have this committee known as the Capitol Complex Security Committee, which is technically involved in this discussion anyway. I don't want to use the Institutions Committee as some kind of a barrier to you being able to hammer this out. just the opposite. In fact, I want to be able to use this committee as a conduit for further conversation if you feel it would be necessary. And we also have access to really good legislative counsel in the event that some tweaks of an MOU that you're not quite understanding might be able to be resolved with legislative counsel chipping in with whoever the counsel is that you're hiring around the table. And that's not to insult anybody. We just happen to have a group that handles drafting things like that a lot. So there's some experience there if you need it. Our committee is going to get a lot busier after the 19th of March. That's crossover date for the Capitol bill to come into our room. And so we're going to be really occupied after that, but I'm going to hold open the week of March 9th, just in case you need to have any further discussion or want to flesh something out. I'll leave a spot there available in case you do, but I'll just keep my fingers crossed from here that everybody's talking and able to finish up a product. Anybody have anything else, questions, comments, or whatever? Okay, I think that means you're all free to go. Have a great day, and thank you very much once again.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Committee, hang on for just a minute.